with that, we will move on. If you do need to take a personal break, feel free to go ahead, but we're just gonna move on trucking. So with that, we're gonna transition over into a Marine Reserves update with Kristen Dawn from ODFW. We're gonna set up her presentation and get her going. Kristen, do you have anyone joining you?
No.
Okay, just checking. Didn't want to be remiss in introducing someone. Do you have any handouts you want us to give out?
I'm going to be giving everyone a handy dandy binder, a reference Marine Reserves reference binder, but I'm going to save that till the end so people aren't distracted because I want to really sell you on it. I'm diving into the binder later, so. All right, thanks, Andy.
Instead of reselling what he wants for. Do you have a question?
Thank you.
Just wanted to say, kind of in response to what Richard brought up about finfish, non-native finfish aquaculture, just wanted to, basically all of our oyster culture on the coast is non-native species, and you probably know that, which is regulated by ODFW.
It's regulated by urban agriculture.
Yeah. Although the seed transfer is transportation is regulated by
But it's ODA.
yeah.
Well, thanks.
To be clear.
Kristen, thanks for joining us and for driving over from the coast. And we look forward to hearing your Marine Reserve update. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So for those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Kristen Dawn. I work for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I lead the Marine Reserves program. Our program is responsible for the management and scientific monitoring of Oregon's 5 marine reserve sites. And this body, OPAC, played a critical leadership role during the planning and designation process of Oregon Marine Reserves. We are now in implementation of Oregon's 5 marine reserve sites, and so usually once or twice a year, our staff come and give an update to OPAC on how things are going with Marine Reserves implementation and the work being done by our program. But it's been over a year since we've done a Marine Reserves update, and I do know that there's been some new OPAC members. So I thought actually today what we would be doing is just a Marine Reserves recap, a general overview of Oregon's Marine Reserves, just where they are, how did we get to these 5 sites, a reminder of what the goals of Oregon's Marine Reserves are, and then just a high-level overview of the ODFW Marine Reserves program and the work we're doing with regards to implementation. And then at the end, as I mentioned, I'll be handing out a handy-dandy Marine Reserves binder. It's got a lot of great reference materials for folks to take home with you, and I'm sure study over. But here are the 5 sites. I think probably most of you are familiar with them. So Oregon has designated 5 sites. These are areas in the ocean that have been reserved for conservation and scientific research. They are all located within state waters. And let's see, what else do I want to say about them? Yeah, and again, OPAC played a significant role in getting these sites designated. Marine reserves and marine protected areas have been created around the world, but most of them have been created for different reasons. So here in Oregon, these are the goals that these 5 sites have been designed and placed in order to try to accomplish. So our 5 sites are set up to conserve marine habitats and biodiversity. They are to serve as scientific reference sites for us to learn about marine reserve protections and for us to learn more about Oregon's nearshore ocean environment in order to inform ocean management and policy here in Oregon. And then these sites were specifically designed and placed in areas so as to avoid significant adverse impacts to ocean users and coastal communities. These goals were established by OPAC, and they are part of the mandate for the sites. Just as a reminder, you'll notice all the sites have a component in red, which is the Marine Reserve component of the site. And just as a reminder, the Marine Reserves allow no extractive activities, which includes no ocean development, and no fishing. But most of the sites also include one or more marine protected area adjacent to the reserve. So those are depicted in all our maps of areas in blue. And the marine protected areas still prohibit ocean development, but all of the marine protected areas allow some type of fishing activity. And what fishing is or isn't allowed in each MPA is specific to that MPA. And in the handouts, I do have an overview of what the allowances and prohibitions are in each of the MPAs if you're interested in taking a look at those. And then this is just to indicate that we actually phased in the implementation of the 5 sites. The first 2 went in 2012, harvest restrictions at the second 2 sites in 2014, and then just a couple years ago on the North Coast was our last site at Cape Falcon. Our program and the Marine Resource Planning implementation is guided by these mandates. There was an executive order by the governor back in 2008 that was instrumental in guiding the planning process. 2 marine reserves bills have been passed by the state legislature. And then in 2008, OPAC also adopted the Marine Reserves Policy Recommendations document, which lays out the goals and objectives of Oregon's marine reserve sites and also provides planning and implementation principles and guidelines, which we have used to guide the work that our program is doing in implementation. I have provided copies of all these documents for you in your binders, so you have those as a reference. But I thought we'd take a little trip down memory lane and just, some of us were on that journey together, maybe others were standing on the sidelines, but I just wanted to remind us, how did we get to these 5 sites? These 5 sites were over 10 years in the making. It was a very long, extensive process that and a very extensive public process, largely guided by OPAC. So I just wanted to walk us through, how did we get to these 5 sites? Okay, here we go. So formal marine resource discussions began at the state level back in the year 2000 at the request of the governor, asking OPAC to consider whether or not the state should implement marine reserves in our state waters. OPAC did come out with a report with recommendations that recommended that the state should implement marine reserves. But then there was a bit of a hiatus. And then the next governor, back in 2005, requested that OPAC pick up where the initial OPAC recommendations left off. And the governor was requesting sites be recommended for designation. There were a lot of concerns during this process that the timeline was moving a little too quickly and that there wasn't adequate opportunity for the public and constituents to be involved in the process and to have a voice heard. And so the planning process then took a significant turn and kind of change in 2008. And this is where the planning, on-the-ground planning process really hit the road and how we ended up with the current 5 sites. So in 2008, the governor issued an executive order that outlined for ODFW and state agencies on what the process would be for coming up with recommendations for marine reserves designation. The governor also sent a letter to OPAC stating that they wanted OPAC to lead a public nomination process working with the state agencies, and that OPAC would be the one recommending sites for consideration for designation. This executive order was very important, that it provided some pretty clear sideboards of what proposals from the public and recommendations from OPAC should look like. So the governor wanted recommendations from OPAC of 9 or fewer sites for marine reserves designation. Also stated that the size of the reserves needed to be large enough to be ecologically meaningful, but needed to be small enough so as to avoid significant negative economic and social impacts to ocean users and coastal communities. And then it stated that any proposals from the public that were done through a collaborative process that represented diverse interests should be given preference in OPAC's recommendations. In 2008 is also when OPAC finalized the Marine Reserves Policy Recommendations document, which again established the goals and objectives of the reserves and provided some further planning guidelines and principles to the process. So in 2008, OPAC made a call for public proposals. Anyone from the public could submit a proposal. And in the summer of 2008, OPAC had received 20 proposals from the public. Then OPAC did thorough an evaluation and vetting of those sites. State agencies, along with advice from STAC, actually did an agency analysis of each of the proposals, looking at the sideboards that were given, looking at size and spacing guidelines that were provided by STAC, and based on those reports and public testimony, OPAC ended up recommending to the governor that 6 areas move forward. They recommended that 2 sites, one at Redfish Rocks and one at Otter Rock, move forward as pilot sites for immediate designation. And then they recommended that 3 of the proposed sites, they thought the areas were probably good starting points, but they felt that the areas and the proposals needed further evaluation and further vetting by local communities. And so those 3 proposals were at Cape Falcon, Cascade Head, and Cape Perpetua. And then the 6th recommendation actually had to do with the Port of Coos Bay had offered to run their own public process to see if they could come up with a new proposal for the Cape Arago area. So those recommendations were accepted by the governor. The governor then actually forwarded them on at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, to the Coastal Caucus. And from there, the Coastal Caucus sponsored House Bill 3013. So this was the first Marine Reserves Bill. It was passed in 2009, and it basically told ODFW and state agencies to begin implementation of the Redfish Rocks and Otter Rock sites that had been proposed back in 2008 to OPAC. And then the bill also stated that for the 3 other sites, the Cape Falcon, Cascade Head, and Cape Perpetua, that ODFW needed to form community teams that had very specific interest groups represented to further evaluate and have a conversation around the proposals for those areas that were submitted to OPAC and to see if they could come up with recommendations for those specific areas. So in 2009 is when ODFW received funding and staff to actually form the ODFW Marine Reserves Program. Prior to that time, we did not have staff dedicated to Marine Reserves. So we spun up the program at the end of 2009. In 2010, the 3 community teams were formed. Each community team had 32 members, 16 voting, 16 alternates. Those community teams were vetted through the Coastal Caucus. Each team met 1 to 2 times per month for 11 months to go over the proposal that OPAC had handed them to see if they could come up with a new proposal or need to make some adjustments to the proposal from what was handed to them from OPAC. It was a very long, I think you'll see a lot of people nodding their heads in remembrance of that process. It was intense. Every single community team meeting also had a public comment period. So again, there was a very extensive public process, very highly visible during this time. At the end of the 11 months, all 3 of the community teams came up with recommendations. All of them did make alterations from the original proposal that OPAC had handed them. Then ODFW took those proposals. We did another state agency analysis, also vetted through STAC, and we presented those analyses and the proposed recommendations from the community teams with OPAC. We ended up taking the community team's recommendations for Cape Perpetua and Cascade Head as was delivered from the community teams. We did make some minor adjustments to the boundaries of the Cape Falcon proposal that was submitted from the community team. We did that with consensus through OPAC. We then handed the recommendations for the 3 reserve sites back to the Coastal Caucus. And then in 2012, the Coastal Caucus sponsored Senate Bill 1510. So this is the second Marine Reserves bill. And it basically stated state agencies, with ODFW as the lead, go forward with implementation of all 5 of the sites. The Coos Bay community team ended up coming up with a recommendation of no marine reserve. So this is how we ended up with 5 sites. Senate Bill 1510 also calls for a Marine Reserves Program check-in and a report to the legislature in 2023. So that will be the first kind of major check-in point with regards to implementation of the 5 sites. So from that public process, we came up with 5 very unique sites. They are all different sizes. They have different habitats. They have different biological communities. They had different types and levels of fishing pressure occurring at the sites prior to closure. And this is very important because the design and placement of marine reserves does matter. The size, the depth, what habitats are there, and again, the type and level of fishing pressure that occurred at a site prior to closure makes a big difference on what types of conservation outcomes we're likely going to be seeing at each of these 5 sites. It also means we're probably going to see different effects to people and communities based on each of these 5 sites. It also means, because each site is unique, that we've had to tailor what research tools we use at each of the sites and tailor our research sampling design to fit the unique characteristics of each site. Okay, so as I mentioned, the state legislature placed Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife as the lead agency responsible for the management and scientific monitoring of the reserves. But we share management responsibilities of the reserves with state parks, Department of State Lands, and then Oregon State Police actually does all the enforcement at the reserve sites. And then we're very fortunate to be working with a large amount of collaborative partners who are helping us with outreach, with community-based projects, as well as helping us with a lot of the ecological monitoring and research work, as well as the social and economic research work being done at the reserves. So there is no way we would be able to accomplish this work without these partners. In the legislation and in the OPAC policy recommendations documents, there are some key elements to marine reserves implementation that our program is responsible for making sure happens. So one of those is long-term ecological monitoring needs to be occurring at these sites. We also need to be doing social and economic research, which we term human dimensions research, to understand the impacts and effects the marine reserves are having on people and communities. We also need to be providing information and outreach to the public. We need to be engaging communities. In particular, it states engaging fishermen in the research. And there also needs to be active enforcement of the sites. And site management plans need to be developed for each marine reserve. On this timeline here, I have when the ODFW Marine Reserves Program and site implementation began in 2010, and then I also have on this timeline what year each of the marine reserves came online. We began monitoring at the site, at each site 2 years prior to harvest restrictions taking effect. And as I mentioned, Senate Bill 1510 says that in the year 2023, there needs to be a program check-in. There will be an evaluation of the Marine Reserves Program. So we will be reporting on each of our program areas and what have we learned so far from Marine Reserves implementation at these 5 sites. So I want to walk you through this timeline because 2023 kind of sounds far away, but it's actually way closer than you think. And to reach the 2023 report that's due to the legislature, that means in 2021, the Scientific Technical Advisory Committee is going to be selecting an Oregon-based university to do the program evaluation. The statute actually says staff picks an Oregon-based university to do the evaluation. To aid in the evaluation in that year, 2021, our team will be putting together a synthesis report reporting on all aspects of the program that we will be putting together in the year 2021. And that's in order, and so what information will feed into that ODFW synthesis report will be information and data collected from 2010 through 2020. And you see when each of the reserves actually was implemented. And that's in order then to hand over our report to the university in the year 2022. That's the year they will be then doing an evaluation of the program. And they have to have a draft report due in the fall of 2022 to an interim legislative committee. And then they have to have a final report due by March 1st of 2023. So again, even though 2023 looks far away, if you look where we are on this timeline, we're pretty close. So this is why our staff have been working very closely with STAC over the last year to prepare for the ODFW synthesis report and handing over and selecting a university to do the evaluation. I also want to point out on this timeline where we're at when this report will be done and the time frame of which these reserves went into place. Most of these reserves have only been in place a couple of years. And this is important because it's very important that we understand that this time frame is far too short for us to be seeing ecological changes due to marine reserve protections. The scientific community is in agreement that in Oregon's temperate marine system, a minimum of 10 to 15 years after closure will we maybe be able to start detecting ecological changes from marine reserve protections. And in some instances, the scientific literature is stating it may be for some species up to 40 years before we would see changes that we can we can detect scientifically. So that I want to make sure everyone understands where we're at when we're reporting on the program and what our state of knowledge will be at that time. Just quickly wanted to let you know about our team and the work that we're doing. So we have 6 staff on our team. We have 3 staff that are dedicated to overseeing the ecological monitoring at the sites, and that team is led by Dr. Lindsay Aylesworth, who is here today. She can answer any of your hard questions later. We have 1 staff person who is overseeing the social and economic research, or what we call the human dimensions research. And that's Tommy Swearingen, and he ends up working with a lot of outside partners in academia to do a lot of the economics and social science research. And then we have 1 staff member dedicated to leading outreach and community engagements. And then I'm the policy wonk and the program administrator. We are a state agency, so we opt on a biennium budget. Our budget for marine reserves implementation is approximately $1.9 million per biennium, and those come from state general funds. So those are your taxpayer dollars at work. A little more than half of that goes to the 6 marine reserve staff, and about $0.7 million then goes to the program, other program activities, including about $96,000 we provide to Oregon State Police to assist with enforcement. So just wanted to, again, kind of give a high-level overview of our different program areas of work. In future Marine Reserves updates, we'd love to dig deeper into these different program areas, but right now I just want to give you the 30,000-foot view. So for our ecological monitoring, we have created a long-term ecological monitoring program that is tracking ocean changes in Oregon's nearshore waters. And we are looking at multiple aspects of the marine ecosystem. So we're not just looking at fish, we're looking at invertebrates, habitats, seaweeds, fish, and ocean conditions. And we're trying to understand changes occurring in the nearshore ocean over time. And we're trying to understand which of those changes are occurring because of marine reserve protections, and which of those changes are happening because there's something larger happening in the ocean, some sort of large shift occurring in the ocean may be happening, or a large episode such as sea star wasting disease has hit and kind of disrupted the system. And we are doing this, our team is focused on using 4 core monitoring tools to do this work. And each of these tools is used to, has strengths and weaknesses at looking different aspects of the marine ecosystem and are used in different depths and habitats. So we use hook and line as one of our survey tools. We use a remotely operated vehicle, which you can think of as an underwater, like mini submersible that gets piloted around and has a camera system on it. Then we have scuba surveys, and then we also have a video lander, which is a drop camera system that we use. So for instance, the hook and line is great at getting us really good information on fish and size of fish, and if the average size of fish is changing over time, but it doesn't give us much insight into other areas of the ecosystem. Our ROV gets us information on invertebrates, habitats, seaweeds, and fish, but it can only be used in deeper waters. Our scuba dive gets us lots of information on different aspects, but can only be used in shallow water areas. This is why we need to use a suite of tools to do this long-term monitoring. So let's see what else. Oh, and so we started sampling at each of the sites 2 years prior to closure, and we're continuing to monitor for the long term afterwards. And we sample within the marine reserve, and then at each of the sites we also sample outside of the reserve in what we call comparison areas, which are areas still open to fishing. And the idea is we want to track changes both inside the reserve and outside of the reserve over time to see what changes are occurring. So actually, our mighty team of 3 staff are actually sampling at 13 sites up and down the coast. All, between Cape Falcon on the north coast and all the way down towards Humbug Mountain on the south coast, because we monitor at 5 marine reserve sites and at 8 comparison areas. So we actually do not we don't sample at every site every year. We have a staggered sampling approach. And we, as I mentioned, we use different combinations of tool at each site based on what habitats and depths are present at each site. And each sampling tool has a different sampling interval as well.
So we have about 3 minutes left, and we have to save time for questions.
All right.
Thanks.
I just wanted to mention that we also have some long-term collaborations that are helping with our long-term monitoring of marine reserves, including some juvenile fish research, rocky intertidal monitoring, and oceanography. These experts, they provide additional expertise and provide additional resources to our monitoring program. Human dimensions research. Our human dimensions research is examining the economic, social, and cultural dynamics on the coast due to marine reserves implementation. So we're looking at how marine reserves are impacting coastal communities and ocean users. We're also looking to see if marine reserves are helping us learn more about the nearshore ocean to support and better inform ocean policy and management here in Oregon. And I would like to have at the next OPAC meeting, we would like to actually delve really deep into the Human Dimensions research program and give some preliminary findings from some of our research programs to date. We have a very comprehensive suite of different economic and social research projects underway, many of them in done with other academic institutions. So we would love to be on the agenda next time just to do a focus on Human Dimensions research program. Did want to mention Oregon State Police is actively enforcing the sites. They do this at sea through their enforcement vessel. They do a lot of observations from land. They partner with U.S. Coast Guard, who does helicopter flights, and then Oregon State Police also has an airplane that they do surveillance of the marine reserve sites. And finally, just wanted to touch on some of the outreach. So some of our outreach is on just general marine reserves awareness and also what the rules and regulations are. But a lot of our outreach has to do with keeping the public informed and engaged in the work that our program and our collaborators are doing. And I do have a lot of examples from some of our outreach efforts in the binder that I encourage you to take a look at. But wanted to share with you some ways you guys can be keeping tabs on the program and the work that's happening. We have a website. I highly recommend you check it out. at OregonMarineReserves.com. We have a monthly newsletter. If you're not already subscribed, it comes to your inbox once a month, highlights what work we're doing in the field, if we have any reports out, if there's any upcoming meetings. Great way to keep tabs on what's happening. A lot of our studies, we've been producing infographics that are summaries of the findings from some of our research to date. Great way to, instead of delving into a really scientific technical document, to get an idea of some of the findings to date. We have an annual newsletter dedicated to our hook and line surveys that we put together. We have volunteer anglers come out to help us with those surveys. This is a great way to keep them informed on the data they're helping to collect. Of course, we're doing scientific publications and reports. We do have a Flickr page. If you are in need of some good underwater photos or research photos, you're welcome to pilfer photos from our Flickr account. And we also put together short videos highlighting some of the research and some of the reserve sites on our YouTube channel. And I did want, as one final note, in the outreach examples, I would highly encourage you to check out a leaflet we put out. We now have a lot of monitoring data under our belt, and we're now being able to start using information from our long-term monitoring to help other management efforts in Oregon. So for instance, some of the data from our program is going to feed into the Cabazon stock assessment this year. It's some of the only Oregon-based data being provided for the Cabazon assessment. So this is a big deal. We're pretty proud of it. But you know, this is the benefit of having a long-term nearshore monitoring program that can be helping inform other management efforts in Oregon. So I would encourage you to take a look at that leaflet. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for these really nice binders that you put together for us. It's a great resource. So we have about 2.5 minutes left for questions. And I see Lauren. You're welcome.
Thank you, Kristen. When we started this process, my hair was the same color as yours.
Mine's dyed at this point.
And it has been a long road, but I just wanted to point out a few little things that I jotted down along the line here as you were making your presentation, which, thank you, is much more pithy than it used to be. Of course, you've been able to develop more things as time went by. Enforcement. The charter industry is pretty jealous of those boundaries as well, and we don't hesitate to inform people that are fishing on the wrong side of the line that, hey, you're not where you should be. And some of them appreciate it, others give us the solitary salute, in which case we call Ryan Kerr or other enforcement agents. Something that we have done to try to augment our fisheries to take some of the pressure off the areas around the marine reserves was we pushed really hard for the long leader fishery, and we do very well in that. And that's a whole nother story that we won't go into right now. We've been active with the hook and line surveys, and that is so popular for people that volunteer to do that it's really kind of mind-boggling to me. There's an extensive waiting list, and people get pretty testy when they don't wind up on the boat, even though they retain 0 for that day, but they get to just fish their brains out. I would be remiss in honor of Terry Thompson if I didn't bring up the fact that there are 3 marine reserves in Lincoln County, and what are you doing about those darn pinfins? So anyhow, that kind of covers the notes that I'd made, other than one last little thing. I wrote down this one word, tourism, and that was something that we were sold bill of goods on, frankly, years ago by the proponents, some of the proponents. I have yet, since the institution of the Marine Reserves, had anybody, not even once, call and ask, can you take me to see the Marine Reserve? So that's my only real criticism.
Point of process that Lauren Goddard actually does take one of our volunteers out to do bird watching specifically at the Marine Reserve. So I would like the record to reflect that that statement is not necessarily true.
I think the record reflect that we've also chartered boats, trips out to the Marine Reserve.
And oyster catchers specifically.
She's very excited about her trips planned again this spring, Lauren. Those mean a lot
I'm
to her.
glad that she can plan those.
Yes,
Well, I know that
exactly.
you do a special job of getting her out there on the water, and it's appreciated.
Well, we don't just send anybody down in there because where she wants to go, there's places you really shouldn't drive a boat.
It's dicey, I know.
Well, thank you, Kristen, for your time and for coming to join us today, and again for these binders.
Thank
Helpful,
you.
and also an incredibly helpful Tia to Shelby coming to present her stack.